Hi, today we'll be discussing the fear of being alone, and we'll also be looking at a really important passage in the course about how we interpret the actions of others. So let's start with a wonderful quote from the French philosopher and mathematician Blaise Pascal. This is what he said: "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." So we need busyness and distraction to keep us away from that fear of quietness, of sitting in a room alone. And it's amazing what we will put up with and what we'll do just to avoid being alone. All the many special relationships that we enter into where we have to bargain to get our needs met, a little bit of suffering here, we'll suck it up in terms of doing something that we don't really want to do so that we'll keep a connection with someone because, for God's sake, we don't want to be on our own. At least that's how we feel. So the whole inspiration for making this video on being alone was a piece that I read by Elizabeth Bishop, who is an amazing writer. And this particular piece, it'll probably just take me about 5 minutes to read. It's just a page that was written when she was 19 and studying at university and living on campus. And this is what she wrote in response to the kind of comments that were made on the weekends when everybody kind of went home and things were quiet on campus. So this was written in 1929. On being alone. "Perhaps there are ghosts at school, or wicked wolves in hiding on the ridge, or evil spirits that dwell in the depths of the furnace room and grope their sinister way up through the pipes and into our rooms. But we have never seen them. We have lived for 2 seasons untouched by the slightest hint of the supernatural. There are no haunted houses in the immediate vicinity, and no neglected graveyards, scarcely even a blighted tree in this spring term, or a barren field to hold before us as a symbol of terror and death. Why is it then, when there is nothing to fear, and we have surely outgrown the bogies of our younger days, that so many of us seem to dread being alone? We say to each other, 'I hate Sundays, there are so many quiet hours,' or 'It must be wonderful to have a roommate, someone to talk to in study hour.' All this is rather strange. Why does being alone, when we have 100 companions most of the time, present such a great trial? Or why should we wish to keep the conversation going so endlessly? The fear of a quiet hour alone is greater than the fear of all those innumerable quiet hours alone that are ahead of all of us. There is a peculiar quality about being alone, an atmosphere that no sounds or persons can ever give. It is as if being with people were the earth of the mind, the land with its hills and valleys, scent and music. But in being alone, the mind finds its sea, the wide, quiet plain with different lights in the sky and different, more secret sounds. But it appears that we are frightened by the first breaking of its waves at our feet. And now we will never go on voyages of discovery, never feel the free winds that have blown over water, and never find the islands of the imagination, where live who knows what curious beasts and strange peoples. Being alone can be fun. Alone, the mind can do what it wants to, without even the velvet leash of sleep. But we can never understand this while we stand on the shore with our backs to the water and cry after our companions. Perhaps we shall never know the companion in ourselves who is with us all our lives, the nearness of our minds at all times to the rare person whose heart quickens when a bird climbs high and alone in the clear air." That is it. That is Elizabeth Bishop's wonderful essay on being alone. And what I'm going to do now is go through a little bit about Elizabeth's story, her personal life, and then link all of this, including Elizabeth's piece there, to A Course in Miracles and to the whole idea of the fear of being alone, but using the imagery that Elizabeth uses. So Elizabeth had a very difficult childhood. In infancy, her father died, and her mother had some severe mental health issues. And by the time Elizabeth was 5 years old, her mother was committed as an involuntary patient to a mental health facility. And Elizabeth was shunted from maternal grandparents, living with them, which she actually enjoyed, to then being moved to her father's grandparents to live there, which she didn't enjoy. But there was this sense that she never really had a secure place. From there, she went on to living at university, and for a lot of her life, she travelled. She lived in Brazil for somewhere between 10 and 15 years, back to America and all over the place doing her writing. And I think that it was her writing that saved her from a very deep sense of loneliness and not having a place that she could call home. So her writing was extraordinary, and I think that inner sense, a lot of the time when children grow up, she was the only child in the family, being alone and feeling alone, that inner imagination is what saves them, because it was her creative life where she got in touch with an inner resource, is what the author Janet Frame called her imagination, a deep inner resource that connected her to a strong sense of self. And that resource is what they both employed in their writing, and it gave them a good foundation wherever they went. Because I think both writers, Janet Frame included, did initially in their lives really struggle with a sense of having a place to rest and call home. So in Elizabeth's piece on being alone, the ocean is the gift that we could discover if we could be alone and be with those peaceful hours. We'd discover this wonderful resource. It's like it's the unconscious, but it's the nice part of the unconscious. It's the part that Jung would say includes our spiritual self, the self that is beyond the ego. And it's a peaceful self, and it's a self that is joyful, and where our imagination can thrive in connection with that self. And so, but we're also afraid of it, as Elizabeth describes. We turn our back to it and look to the land and to the people and to busyness because there's something that we're afraid of. Now, in A Course in Miracles terms, we are afraid of that peace because we are afraid, our ego is afraid of connecting with that capital S self. But the ocean, as we know from Moby Dick, from stories like 1,000 Leagues, or is it 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the ocean also symbolises where our fears are. In Moby Dick, the deep bottomless blue of the ocean is where sharks and other murderous creatures live. And so in the start of this piece by Elizabeth, she talks about the bogies that they're afraid of at night alone. What have she got here? The supernatural, the idea of haunted, the places being haunted at night. That all speaks to the fear of the ocean based on what lies underneath, the monsters, the sea monsters. So the alone that is symbolized by the ocean represents two things. It represents the peace that you can get in touch with in terms of our spiritual self, but it also represents, and that's a threat to the ego, but the other threat is the monsters that we fear lurk in the deep, deep bottomless blue. Now, the fear of being alone and afraid of all the monsters and the scary stuff coming up, we can look back to childhood and see that that's something that all children, to various degrees, experience when they're little, when they go to bed, into their room to go to sleep alone. The Course says in Finding the Presence, in sleep you are alone and your awareness is narrowed to yourself. And that is why the nightmares come. So this idea of being alone is so terrifying to us, and we can relate it back to the Course's myth of how the world began, in that when we believed that we had separated from God by our wish to have a separate autonomous existence, our first experience was isolation, of being alone, from being encompassed in a sense of oneness, like being in the womb. In the womb, we're in this oceanic oneness where our needs are met instantly through the connection through the umbilical cord. We don't even get a chance to feel hungry. So we never feel deprived. We're constantly being provided for in a continuous stream of nurturing from that environment, we then, boom, land in this world of separation where we are now isolated from that sense of comfort. And it is extremely distressing, confusing. We're alone. And that is a source of terror to us, of grief as well. And that is why being alone is so scary to us as a child, because it is replicating not only that first separation in birth, the birth trauma, but that is replicating, symbolizing the first split from God in the ontological myth that is within our imagination, in our unconscious. So now I'd like to read a section from chapter 11 where it talks about children going into their room and being afraid of the monsters and what's in the cupboard. And that's all of us. And they are those monsters in the deep that we're afraid of when we're alone. And this section explains what those monsters are and the way to lessen our fear of those monsters. So here we go from paragraph 13 in section 8, chapter 11. I'm going to read paragraphs 13, 14 and 15. Children perceive frightening ghosts and monsters and dragons, and they are terrified. Yet if they ask someone they trust for the meaning of what they perceive and are willing to let their own interpretations go in favour of reality, their fear goes with them. When a child is helped to translate his ghost into a curtain, his monster into a shadow, and his dragon into a dream, he is no longer afraid and laughs happily at his own fear. You, my child, are afraid of your brothers and of your father and of yourself. These are the monsters. Our self-concept, our brother, our concept of our brother, and our concept of our father. They are all riddled with shame, guilt, and fear. Again, you, my child, are afraid of your brothers and of your father and of yourself, but you are merely deceived in them. Ask what they are of the teacher of reality, and hearing his answer, you too will laugh at your fears and replace them with peace. For fear lies not in reality, but in the minds of children who do not understand reality. It is only their lack of understanding that frightens them, and when they learn to perceive truly, they are not afraid. And because of this, they will ask for truth again when they are frightened. It is not the reality of your brothers or your father or yourself that frightens you. You do not know what they are, and so you perceive them as ghosts and monsters and dragons. Ask what they are, or ask what their reality is, from the one who knows it, and he will tell you what they are. For you do not understand them, and because you are deceived by what you see, you need reality to dispel your fears. Would you not exchange your fears for truth, if the exchange is yours for the asking? For God is not deceived in you. You can be deceived only in yourself. Yet you can learn the truth about yourself from the Holy Spirit, who will teach you that, as part of God, deceit in you is impossible. When you perceive yourself without deceit, you will accept the real world in place of the false one you have made. And then your Father will lean down to you and take the last step for you by raising you unto himself. And that last line reminds me of the last part in Elizabeth Bishop's short piece here, that if we would allow ourselves to meet the sea and to learn what we can from it, and to let ourselves connect with that rare person within, whose heart quickens when a bird climbs high and alone in the clear air. So that bird climbing high and alone in the clear air is like God reaching down to draw us up to him. So I'm not saying that that's what Elizabeth was saying, but I think the picture for myself, the metaphor, is a nice one to describe. There is that rare person in all of us, that capital S self, whose heart quickens when they see a bird alone flying high into the air, soaring into the air, a metaphor for that freedom of being taken, that God taking that last step, and us knowing that our reality is in eternity, is above the battleground. Okay, so we've just read from the Course on how to deal with monsters. We ask the Holy Spirit for his reinterpretation of what we see, of what we're afraid of, and he will reinterpret it in a way that lets us know there is nothing to be afraid of. And following on from that, the very next page in the Course, so it's the first page of chapter 12, the Holy Spirit's curriculum is the name of the chapter, and the segment is the judgment of the Holy Spirit. This section tells us what the danger is if we do the interpreting, if we try and work out somebody's motivation. And so this is how to make a monster. In other words, the Course uses the term, what happens when we make the error real, when we make what happens in the world all that we see, and we don't see beyond it. When we interpret things in that way, we are making the error real, making the world real, making shame and guilt real, making isolation real. Because whenever we make shame and guilt real, we're making the separation from God real, and we will feel isolated no matter what's going on around us. We'll try and perhaps distract us, or try and get more people around us, or cling to people to get rid of that sense of isolation, but it won't work because we've made shame and guilt real. So this section is a great one for really defining, becoming sure about how we are interpreting someone's actions, and the fine line between what is helpful and what is harmful in terms of interpreting. So here's that section. You have been told not to make the error real, and the way to do this is very simple. Understand that you do not respond to anything directly, but to your interpretation of it. Your interpretation thus becomes the justification for the response. This is a really important part. That is why analysing the motives of others is hazardous to you. If you decide that someone is really trying to attack you, or desert you, or enslave you, you will respond as if he had actually done so, having made his error real to you. To interpret error is to give it power, and having done this, you will overlook truth. So much of our interpretation, especially in this psychologically sophisticated age, involves things like, they're really trying to control me here, or, they really want this. That's why they're behaving like that. And we might be right. They're projecting. They're projecting onto me. They're upset with their boss, and that's why they're acting the way they are to me. They're taking it out on me. Okay, that's all fine, and it might be true. I do that kind of interpretation a lot because psychology really interests me as a science, if you like. But to stop there, or to make a big deal about that kind of interpretation is not helpful, because as the Course says, it makes the error real. It roots us in this world and what the actions of a body does. The only helpful interpretation about the motives of what other people do is to see it as either an expression of love or a call for help, regardless of what the action is, regardless of whether they're trying to enslave you, or they're trying to cling to you, or they're trying to do this or that or the other, or they're projecting, or they're transferring. It doesn't matter. If it's not coming from love, it's coming from fear. And the Course also says that it's important that we ask the Holy Spirit to do that interpreting for us, to tune into the Holy Spirit and ask them to look with their eyes, to ask for their interpretation of the other person, and to be able to look through their vision at the other person. Because even if intellectually we think, that's a call for help, not, whatever, even if we think that, but if we're doing that on our own, we won't really believe it or be able to see it that way, because on our own, we are too tied to form, the Course says. We are too tied to believing in the actions of another person, to giving meaning first and foremost to that. So we always need help. So it's always important to ask for help from the Holy Spirit to be able to see the call for help. Don't try and see it on your own. You'll be kidding yourself. It'll just be an intellectual exercise. So in paragraph 2 It says the analysis of ego motivation is very complicated, very obscuring, and never without your own ego involvement. So even when we think we're right on the level of form, we may or may not be. And does it really matter? It actually doesn't really matter, because the only thing that matters is perceiving it through the Holy Spirit's vision. And so here I'll skip to paragraph 3. There is but one interpretation of motivation that makes any sense. And because it is the Holy Spirit's judgment, it requires no effort at all on your part. Every loving thought is true. Everything else is an appeal for healing and help, regardless of the form it takes. Can anyone be justified in responding with anger to a brother's plea for help? No response can be appropriate except the willingness to give it to him, for this and only this is what he is asking for. In reality, that is only what anyone is asking for, if they're coming from a place of fear and if they're not coming from a place of love. And sometimes how would we know the difference? We just need to always ask the Holy Spirit for their help to see others. So a sure way to make a monster is to try and interpret another's behaviour on our own, to try and to interpret it in terms of the world. They want this. They're doing this because of this. They're doing that. We use a lot of mental energy trying to work out where other people are coming from. And the Course is saying you don't have to do that. Things can be a lot easier if you just leave it up to ask the Holy Spirit for help to see people through their eyes. And there's only two things. It's either they're coming from a place of fear or a place of love. Whatever the case is, your responsibility is to respond with love in either case. So life could be a whole lot easier when we just leave interpretations up to the Holy Spirit. And when we do that, we're no longer seeing monsters out there, scary things out there. If we're not emphasizing the shame or the guilt that might be behind somebody else's behavior, then we're not reinforcing those things in ourselves. If we're not seeing the monster out there, the monster of the spectre of guilt, the spectre of shame, if we're not seeing them out there, then we're not reinforcing them within ourselves. Then we're better able to go to the ocean, to go and face the sea, rather than turning our backs on it, forever looking for some distraction in the world. So now I'd like to turn to lesson 165, which is called Let Not My Mind Deny the Thought of God. So if all our monsters are reflections of our own belief in shame and guilt, if that means that we also have an image of God as someone or something that is out there to get us, a fearful God that to punish us for having separated from him and gone and been our own boss, so that's the origin of the authority problem. He's a monster as well. If we have an idea of God as this punitive figure, he's a monster of the deep. We're a monster of the deep. Our brother is a monster of the deep because we think they're just like us, fearful, out for self-preservation. They'll throw anybody under the bus to stay safe. Well, so will we when we're in our ego. Everything's a monster. Everything is scary. But as we work with the Course and its process of forgiveness, we learn that nobody's a monster. And especially that God isn't a monster. So our self-doubt turns into certainty of who we are as a holy self. And our certainty of God comes to replace our fears about him. And that's what this lesson is about. And I'd just like to read out the final parts of this lesson. Now is all doubting past, the journey's end made certain, and salvation given you. Practice today in hope, for hope indeed is justified. Your doubts are meaningless, for God is certain. And the thought of him is never absent. God has not been destroyed. Sureness must abide within you, who are host to him. This course removes all doubts which you have interposed between him and your certainty of him. We count on God and not upon ourselves to give us certainty, and in his name we practice as his word directs we do. His sureness lies beyond our every doubt. His love remains beyond our every fear. The thought of him is still beyond all dreams, and in our minds, according to his will. There's also a part in the course which has this line: when experience will come to end your doubting has been set. So in the course it's talking about there is a time when experience will come to end all your doubting. And what are those doubts? That the God of love doesn't exist or never existed. That is peace really possible? Am I really a holy son of God? All those doubts. An experience will come to end all that doubting. And to end this video, I'd like to leave on a really lovely note. And we'll go back to Blaise Pascal, who, the French philosopher, mathematician, who had an experience before he died, like the one the course is talking about, an experience to end all doubting, which is something that he really, really yearned for. And this is a section I'm taking from my book, The Farthest Reaches of Inner Space. And it's from an essay called Proof. So first I'll just read a little bit about Blaise Pascal. His mother died when he was 3. So he's getting some similarities with Elizabeth Bishop. His mother died when he was 3. When he was 28, his father died. His father was a mathematician as well, and Blaise took on the trade through his father. And he also suffered from a lot of medical complaints. His health was very poor. This is Blaise's health. And when his father died, it was a big loss to him because now he would be living on his own. His sister, who was living with them as well, had wanted to become a nun, but his father wouldn't have it. He was a man of science. No, you're not going to become a nun. But when he died, the sister went into the convent, and she had also been someone to help take care of Blaise and his health. So after she entered the convent and Blaise's father had died, he was now living alone. He was very lonely and he had poor health and he really was scared. And she helped him with some spiritual guidance, and that's how he got into spirituality and became a very a deep spiritual thinker. But he still always had this niggling doubt. Is it all real? He wanted an experience to end his doubting, and he did receive one. So this is from this essay, from the start of the essay, and I'd just like to leave you with this experience. Shortly after the French polymath and philosopher Blaise Pascal died, a servant began sorting through his clothes. While handling one of Pascal's favourite coats, they noticed something sewn into it, close to where it would lie over Pascal's heart. Curious, they cut open the sealed hiding place and found a piece of paper wrapped in parchment. On the paper, in Pascal's handwriting, were details of an ecstatic religious experience that lasted, quote, from about 10:30 in the evening until about midnight, end of quote, on Monday, the 23rd of November, 1654. Now, quote, forgetfulness of the world and of everything except God, wrote Pascal of this experience, along with, quote, certitude, feeling, joy, peace, end of quote. This brief document is known as the memorial. Going back to that last line in Elizabeth Bishop's piece again of the bird soaring and the course saying God taking that last step, and the time will come where experience will end all doubting. I think Blaise's experience speaks to the joy that he felt when he became certain that God was real and that God was love. And that experience comes as we learn that there are no monsters. So allowing the Holy Spirit to interpret people's actions is also how we let go of that fear of being alone. Thanks for watching, and tune in again. God bless you all. Thank you so much. Bye.